Welcome to the Today Dreamer podcast. I'm so appreciative to have you here with us. The podcast and YouTube channel is here to help you cultivate your practice of presence so that you may more fully be able to contribute and participate in the blossoming of the emergent world story in your own unique way. Today's guest is Renee McCready, who is a shamanic healer, plant wisdom teacher, plant-based chef, earth doula, wild crafter, and an earth wisdom holder and educator. This is part of a two-part series, and there's an encouragement to engage in both parts if you're feeling like you're getting something out of the show. Before we do move into things with Renee, I'd like to invite you to take a moment to pause with us. You may like to close down the eyes, come into a deeper state of stillness, or focus in on a point in the distance as we do this. And in your own way and in your own time, there's an open invitation to take a really slow and gradual inhalation in through the nose. And whenever it is that you may reach the peak of this mountain, feel free to just pause for a moment, noticing the subtleties of your experience. And when it feels right, exhale just as gracefully as you release. You might like to do this one more time as we gracefully move into this conversational space with Renee.
So one of my hats that I have practiced in the past is I'm a raw plant-based chef. I don't do it as a job these days, but it is still very integral to how I live. Although my philosophy is different now on veganism than it has been in the past. It's much more in accordance to the shamanic pathway now. But I feel like food is actually a really good place for people to start to connect more to the practices of earth wisdom and right relationship. Because when we start with the food, we're nourishing ourselves and we're nourishing our loved ones. So why wouldn't we want to do it from a space of love and good quality nourishment? I mean, I think that there is a re-education that needs to happen and is happening around it. But it doesn't have to be a great big thing for people. It can be just slowly implementing, healthier food options. But one of the things I say to my students is, what if we were to introduce more food into our lifestyle that added more light? And what does that mean for you?
More light.
Yeah, foods that add more light. So I go back, sort of the foundations of the food for me are a lot to do with how we hold light and how our cells hold light. So they literally hold photonic energy in the cells of the body. The cells hold an electrical charge that runs across the cells that has an interrelationship with water in our body as well. So when we speak to the food and when we speak to the water, we're speaking to, the energy in our body and the light in our body. And then if we think of the sun, and the sun holds light, and the sun's an activator, the sun, helps the plants create chlorophyll, which is their blood source that we then consume. And if we look at those interrelationships, if we just think about adding more light, immediately it takes us to a place of, well, I want to eat more, I want to introduce more whole food or more plants into my diet. Doesn't mean you have to go vegan or you have to go any particular strict dietary ways. It just means intuitively listening more to what your body requires. So that's kind of one of my philosophies is the light. And then there's the concept around assimilation as well. So if we think about we're assimilating the nutrients from the food, but we can't separate ourselves as a tool of assimilation. So we're also assimilating and extracting from our environment continuously. So the process of assimilation is not just about eating the food, it's about where we place ourselves in the moment we're eating, who we place ourselves with, where the food has come from, the assimilation of the food, the things that we're growing. So we're continually in relationship to our environment and the food that we're eating. So we need to sort of, it's like almost like, again, I feel like I'm continually going back to the principle of the holographic universe, really. I believe in fasting as well. I'd love to know your feelings around fasting too. I think it's incredibly beneficial on a physical and on a spiritual level. And that's something I do a lot of and benefit a lot from as well. What else can I tell you about food?
Yeah, tell me more. I could
so many things I could. So I call it kitchen wisdom. So another part of food that I feel like I would like to maybe impart for people is ancestral food ways. So the bridge between you, the land, and your own ancestors. So I always think about, when I'm thinking about how I exist and navigate the world, I think about my blood ancestry. I think about the land that grew me and I took my first breath. And then I think about the land that I now reside on that holds me. And so those three sort of points come into sort of, anything that I do. And with food, if I think you think back into your ancestral food ways, it's when we start to maybe recover recipes that got handed down, or asking family members for recipes from the grandmothers and starting to recreate some of those old recipes, taking them, you might want to change some of the food items in there to more suit your eating habits, but bringing a rebirth and a reincarnation to these old ways that the recipes through our lines were held. And the thing is that if you come from certain cultures, like Western cultures, we were like, yeah, but what was it? Potatoes. Yeah. That's my ancestral food from Celtic origins. But there's always the land that you come from. I come from Aotearoa. So for me, the land that grew me was about, root vegetables. And so my alignment in my body to that food is strong. So they would nourish me. So working with root vegetables like the kumara. And then where I live now, the land that I live on now, I live, in a forest in regional Victoria. So it's like wild food. I have an abundance of wild food that I can go out and forage that's bioregional. It's from my biome. So my microbiome and the biome of this land are finding relationship. So I'm covering off those three areas in my ancestral foodways, if that makes sense. And this is a philosophy, I suppose, or that I've kind of just developed over the years of being a foodie, but it's also the thing that interests me is the merge between food and nutrition from a spiritual perspective. And I call it holographic nutrition.
Yeah, you mentioned the word holographic a few times, and
I know. Best.
Yeah. I'm very curious to hear more about your take on that word. But what you've shared is quite insightful there in terms of blending the three different, the ancestry on a deep blood level, where you've been kind of created, and then where you are now.
Yeah.
And considering those spaces. Yeah. And the matching between the biome and kind of your microbiomes, that's quite a mind-blowing thought.
Yeah, that's a whole other. And when I teach my students, we do go off onto tangents around that one. That's a bit of a mind blower for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Your ancestors, that's the thing, the biome that exists, that you live in, the soil, that it's all our ancestors, you know.
yeah.
All of it, and it's all inside you as well as outside of you.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I mean, when yeah, I'm just kind of thinking of water now in this moment,
Yeah,
and
water.
how that fits into the kind of hologram.
Yeah. Well, it's water, we know that water holds memory, and we know that it's the great carrier of consciousness. And I often think about how water holds the environment as well. So it holds echoes or imprints of the environment. So that's why if we can get, the cleaner the water we can get, the better it is, because it's actually holding, in a way, the homeopathic of the environment that it's in. Part of the reason why I live where I live now is because of the water.
So this was a conscious
Yes.
part of your decision.
It was actually my partner that time.
Yeah.
And he had insights through his own visions of a particular area that held amazing water that was pure, and crystals that were in the earth. And he got the name of where it was and everything, where we live. And we came in and had a look and couldn't believe that it was actually in a forest. And this was 6.5 years ago now, and 7 years ago. And the water here, because we live not far from Dalesford, and the water is, we basically go and collect our water straight out of the ground, and it's mineralized and charged and structured. It's all there. And, you know, sometimes I have to slap myself to remember that I get to drink this incredible water all of the time. And I feel like it's it's hydrating on a whole other level, hydrating the body, but also the mind, on a whole other level. And it's just with water, it's like we want to try and take water into the space of being as close to nature as it possibly can. So we can restructure our water, but we also want to move away from drinking water that's fluoridated and chlorinated and full of chemicals, as much as we possibly can anyway. And then there's blessing and prayer that we can use. And the thing about water is it teaches us so much, because, water seeks relationship, and it teaches us so much about that as well. It will form whatever container we put water in, it'll take that particular form of wherever we place it. And it's also the waterways, the waterways of earth are the blood of the earth as well. So there's so much nourishment in that. And what I often say to my students is, when you drink your glass of water, and you mentioned this before, Michael, when you were saying, the elements that were involved and where it came from and all of the things. Like, this is really something to ponder and consider when you're eating your food or drinking your glass of water, is, what does this represent to you? What does this hold? What's been before this moment? Where does this cyclic back to? What moment does this cycle back to?
What do you mean by that last part?
Like back to, like, for example, with a food source, who planted the seed? Where did the plants come from? Where did they grow? What soil was it? What country was it? People, I think, often don't even query where their food is grown, let alone if it's Australian or grown outside the country. Just things like that, just the awareness of these things.
Yeah, and what does it represent that we're putting that into our bodies? And that's kind of
that's reverence. That really is having reverence. And when we have that reverence, it sort of changes the relationship, and it changes the energy in that moment of how the assimilation, what I spoke about before, about how we're assimilating constantly. We're in this exchange constantly with the world. And if we can just take those moments, it's funny, the more I talk to you about things, the more I realize that so much of it is very, very connected to Buddhist perspective, as in, I don't think I'd actually thought that so much before until you mentioned it.
I find it fascinating how, what I've noticed from just speaking to you and just, the process of us connecting in this way, is that there's a real blending of different traditions within
Yeah.
you, but within all of us, really. But it seems like there can be, alternate paths where some people get on kind of one path for a long period of time, and then that kind of, becomes a really deep part of their story, and other people maybe gather from different elements, and then, ultimately we're all creating our own from these different spaces.
It's sovereign, isn't it, really, in the end? And, I think about what is interesting. I was actually thinking about what you just said this morning, and I actually wrote something down about ancestral work, and that our ancestral work, there's our blood line, there's our line of the land where we live, and then there is what inspires us on an ancestral level. So what inspires us on an ancestral level would be, like, for example, playing the medicine drum. That might not be, that's not, my lineage, my blood lineage, but it's inspired me, and it connects deeply with me, and makes me want to share it, and as a medicine tool. But it's not my bloodline. So I was acknowledging how we are built up of these many components. But I was thinking an ancestral, I think a lot on the ancestral ways, the old ways. So
it's interesting to think,
especially in this day and age of, cultural appropriation and this kind of narrative, I think it's important to remember that exists, but so does being inspired. And
that's
we're in reverence, so if we're in reverence to it, and we're humble in it, and we acknowledge it, then it changes it from being, I'm just appropriating this because I want to be cool, to there's something in this that's so meaningful, and it connects to me so deeply, because globally all people did very similar things once upon a time. The Celts held vision quests and medicine circles with psilocybin and all of that, very similar to the South Americans, different but similar. So when we're called into our sort of medicine work in different ways, whatever that is, sometimes our entry point is through something like ayahuasca, or going to a drumming circle, or, do you know what I mean? It might not be where we finish up, but it's our entry point. And so we must be mindful of that's part of the process of our evolution back to ourselves again, which hopefully is going to be the thing that, saves us in the end, is like this, the reconnection back to ourselves, back to the land. And what a big topic.
What you're sharing right now is actually quite alive for me as well, really recently, and at the moment, actually, like really recently, because there's a sense of, I'm in a similar kind of a process, I would say, in terms of re-amalgamation of different from a blend of different kind of influences, and this whole idea of working through deeper aspects of, like what you said earlier about, you feel like something's kind of completed, but then you're going around the same part of the mountain, and you're like, oh yeah, well, there's still much more here than I had anticipated. And this area of shame actually comes up, and the area of kind of, maybe an unconscious element of shame around, in that process of how do we then form this new clay with all this kind of with the deeper aspects of shame still held within our bodies and with our beings through our own, upbringing, or even through the ancestral line. And there's a sense of, almost like a sovereignty that comes in forming our own truth through whatever different, different lines have led into our existence and into our very being, without needing to compare or become someone that we're not. It's a sense of really stepping into who we are by dropping that sense of shame and coming back into an inner truth or authenticity. It seems like it's quite an important process, and it is a difficult thing in the world that we live in with I was talking to someone last night, actually, around this, one of your students, because I wanted to just have a bit of a chat with a few people around their experience of your work. And we were talking about how there's examples of that, almost like a certain perspective of success being achieved without going down that path. And then there's a sense of, what does it look like to just close your eyes and walk, and to trust your own footsteps, and to breathe into your own, just sing to the sound of your own drum for a moment, from a place of truth. And what comes out in that point, what develops, and what can we contribute from that space. I think, that definitely seems like, part of the journey that's alive for me at the moment, in exploring that and moving into that space with open eyes and an open heart.
It's like when we rediscover parts of our own blueprint, that sort of fundamental soul spark within us that holds the story.
I guess this kind of takes place multiple times throughout our life.
I 100%. And like you were talking about the mountain, like I often have this analogy that I use for myself, where I'm like thinking about, I'm moving up a spiral, and sometimes you're revisiting something and you're like, really, am I here again? But the difference is like the mountain analogy is you're moving around it, but it's a different vantage point. So the experience might feel the same, but your perspective is going to be different, or deeper, at least, if you've experienced it before. And there might be a bigger, right. I mean, I know this is a pretty common understanding, but even such, I think that I know I continually need to be reminded that myself, that's okay for me to be revisiting this, like even me being in this recreation space at the moment. It's like I was thinking about it the other day, and it's like I can't separate my business from Renee, because my business is me. Like I'm so intrinsically merged with how I am of service to who I am as a person, that my business and myself had to recreate simultaneously at the same time.
Can you tell me more about that? Because that's just like an area that I'm definitely, this whole idea of business is an interesting one, because it's like, there can be an over or an under kind of development in this area of merging money and survival or thriving with being of service. And it's an interesting space to explore, because going over or under isn't quite balanced, and this middle path is an important aspect of the journey. I'm learning at the moment.
It really is. And I feel like it's one of the trickier parts to learn when we're in these spaces as business. And I feel like I'm starting to understand it. I'm not saying I understand it completely. I think that's part of what I'm doing now, is understanding that. And I've had people say to me, but you were doing so well as with my business name of Lady Pachamama, which I've kind of been for the last few years. And it's almost like, why would you pull the plug out from that now? But to me, it was perfect timing to move back into the space of the void. And because I needed to initiate more and step into teacher more, and to do that, I had to undo. And by doing that, and in the recreation, I can take those, as I'm working with it, I'm imagining, how I said blueprint before, I'm imagining the architecture, and then the foundations and the pillars moving up from that space of the architecture. And as part of that, I have to honor both the being of service aspect, but also the physical manifestation of what that looks like in the world for me to live as well. And finding that place of honoring, what am I worth? And it's okay for me to say that. It's okay for me to be in that empowered state now. I haven't done all the work, and I'll never do all the work, but I've done a degree of work that's allowed me to sit in this point where it's okay now to step up and to be met on that level in remuneration, say financially or energetically, or so it's like a refining and then a constant refining. Does that make sense?
Definitely. It's exactly what's happening to me at the moment.
Yeah. And I think there's something about it too. You're probably, I don't know if you're feeling the same way. I'm sort of imagining that you are, though. For me, it's like, if I know that if I come from my integrity,
yeah,
is really important to me.
that's the answer, right?
Then I'm not going to do it wrong. I'm not going to like, it's going to turn up right. And that's something I'm constantly of concern of, especially in this day and age of the curation that you see online and all the stuff, the fake stuff is like, like it's almost, that has almost pushed me more into what I'm about to offer out into the world as well. It's
in
like,
what way?
Short courses. You can do a 2-day course and you can practice shamanic work or ceremonial work or medicine work, or do you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's something. Yeah, I feel the same. This idea of like a real deepened preparation and integration to whatever experience is offered is it seems vital, because it can be this idea of, well, that's another question that I was kind of curious around, is like, people go through these experiences, and sometimes I feel like the things that I offer, I wonder whether, that I get curious around the deep transformative elements of that. But there is something to be said around planting seeds as well.
100%, it's all valuable. Yeah, definitely. But I think it's the planting seeds is really important. But that's I think that the reframing is in, for me, and the work is around. That's why I always talk about initiation, because it's like the seed will be planted in one place, but then the initiation, I call that an activation.
Yes.
And then the initiation is the learned, lived experience, the embodied wisdom that's gained through time. And then as we move through time, we match it with how we place things out into the world. So I got to a certain place, and now I'm having to step in, to step up, to then level out to that next initiation. So it's a constant initiation. When I, in my mind, keep myself understanding that this life path that I'm choosing is an initiation, I can't fall into ego too much, because how could I? Because I'm always going to be this teacher and the student. I'm never going to be just the teacher.
Yeah. And then that's an interesting thing to balance, this deepening of education with the offering aspect as well, because, and obviously the business side of all that as well. So there's a service, there's the business, and then this is deepening of education so that you can deepen that service as well.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing to juggle.
With my students, I often will say, I'm learning from you as well. Like I'm learning just as much, like especially in the residency work, because everyone's in my home for a start, and it's basically they're coming into my life to live with me. And in that space, I have work to share, but I always think about it that I've been given a degree of understanding so that I can help activate that in others. And as I'm seeing that activation, I'm learning back from it. And that's deepening my understanding of the work more. So that the next group of people I go to, that's the ancestral flame keeping that I talk about. That's an interest. It's an interest. I've observed the same process take place. It's like the more people that I share my offerings with, the sense of I'm learning a lot from their stories, and looking at, having a glimpse into so many windows, and connecting that back into my own window, and then being like, and that deepens my offering for the next. A very interesting process. And then there's like these steps that take place that require a period of time for that cocoon to be built and for that transformation to take place. And even questioning you know, so I've even been in a space of questioning, you know, who am I to be this? Who do I think I am, that I think I can, you know, hold this body of work, you know, because I'm certainly not the only one. So why is it that I hold it in this way? So these kind of people are drawn towards this work. You know, why me? So all that kind of, that's been coming up for me a lot. So sitting in that kind of shadow, you know, part of it as well. And
Yeah, and being open to dropping things that, maybe
aren't resonant anymore.
Yeah, and figuring, and that can be a hard process of letting go at the same time.
I've just recently experienced that because I was serving cacao for a very long time, like a long time, in terms of where it's at and in the West. And I'm in retirement at the moment, and that's been a big thing, because it's almost like I was wondering if there's a lot of who I was that was defined by, I'm a cacao facilitator.
Sure.
And now I'm not anymore.
Yeah.
And there's power in that,
Yeah.
because it's requiring me to dig deeper and move more into other ways of working in a ceremonial space.
Well, I think that's where a lot of the issues that I've been finding have come up, in terms of having to, you know, first of all, promote. The promotion thing makes me feel a bit sick, but there's a sense of like, I'm now this person that is, you know, I'm going to put there's a label on me, and that's, I guess there's an illusion of that being a permanent thing, rather than a recognition that that's a transient state, and that's just another element of one part of my journey that will then, you know, through the process of impermanence, how we're evolving in every moment, the sense of that's going to be shed at some point as well, or integrate into something else, and
become new language. You know, we re-language who we are, and that's part of the movement as well.
Yeah. So
right.
I'm wondering, I know we've kind of gone to a few different interesting places.
We really have.
Yeah. And I've got like this curiosity coming up around, what you were doing before, and how often you were having these people live with you, and then what's coming up for you in terms of, if you've even found it another kind of thing. But it sounds like you're going into a deepening process of service, and and how that fits into the bigger picture of, you know, your space to just be, you know, and space to be with your partner, and space to be with the land. I mean, I'm sure it's all integrated, and I'm just curious how you got everything's so integrated. And I know there's a difference in age and experience with us, and there's this kind of pathways and journeys, but there is this interesting kind of curiosity of the process taken to move from, you know, this one version of reality into one that is more connected, through a series of developing choices and openings, and I don't know if all of that, I just tend to block things together.
I would like to say that I've got it all integrated, but I'm not sure that's true. There's moments of it where I'm like, yes, and then other moments where I'm like, still got so much to work out there. But
there is a lot to honor in terms of, you know, your journey, in terms of, you know, living on the land and offering these experiences, even in the previous version.
The iteration that it's been as opposed to where it's going. But, you know, one of the biggest changes was literally being able to move into a forest. So you know how right at the beginning of our conversation I talked about the literal steps that we physically might have to take in our environment, like we might do ritual in order to show up to spirit that we're moving from one space to another.
Yes.
And one of those big things for me was moving into a forest. So I actually studied herbalism when I was very, very young. I was in my late teens, which is pretty amazing now. I never knew that at the time, and I certainly didn't even think about it through my 20s or my 30s or even my early 40s. But I realize now how monumentous that choice was to who I am now, and the cyclic nature of that 30-year period, 35-year period, or 33 years, however long it was, of when I made that decision to start studying herbal medicine. And then I was also lucky enough to spend 3 months with a group of women, and they were connected in through the sort of the green lineage.
Where was that?
In Christchurch in New Zealand.
Nice. Yeah.
I was 19 at the time.
Wow.
Studying herbal medicine.
Yeah.
And learning about the land and plants and organic gardening. And I learned about, sitting around with women, drinking tea and talking about feelings. And I learned the old ways was initiated through the old ways. And that is part of the reason why I do what I do now, is because of that experience. But it's not necessarily experience that I went out and looked for. It turned up in my reality because it was part of my timeline to get me to this moment that I am now. Whereas now I am the person that holds those spaces. Whereas I was the youngest in that group of women. I actually have one photo of that group of women that's up on my Instagram. I was so happy when I found it, actually, because it really reminds me of that cyclic nature of time. And so when I moved to the forest, it allowed that was in me to start to wake up again around my understanding of the earth and plants and practicing animism. And from that point, I was able to start making medicine because I was in a bioregion that was abundant with plants that I could wild harvest and forage. And so I was able to set up my apothecary and start making medicine, and slowly starting offering it to people in small batches. And that's kind of, it just spouted on from that point. And then I was able to, invite students to come and stay with me. So I was, up until recently, offering residency work where people would come and stay for a week with me in the forest, and I would have around 6 people at a time, and they would live in a separate house. I would have a different house for them, so they would have their own house, so they could have their own container of group energy. Because what I learned through experience with working with groups of people in the old ways is what I learned when I was 19 is the group container, and what you learn from each other is just as important as the work itself.
That's its own form of medicine.
It's its own form of medicine, and they're teaching and learning off each other. And so they have their own house and they cook their meals together, and then they come to me in the morning and we open in circle and we drink Thai for hours, and we do the old ways. We share and we talk and we cry and we laugh, and then we move into the body of work for the rest of the day, and we do that day in, day out for 6 days. And then I have to try and expel them all. Come on, off you go home now. After a week.
Yeah.
But I ran my last one a few months ago, which was as part of my retiring and my rebirth into my next space. And what the world was showing me that we needed more of was the old ways. This is how I was taught. Obviously, in between that period of time of me initiating in the old ways as a younger person, and then, living in the city and becoming a mother and studying and working and all the things, a lot of that got forgotten. And it was when I came to the forest that it started to, awaken again. And so now where I'm moving is into apprenticeships. So what I'm going to be offering from next year is, if you really believe in this work, then it requires you to commit to 12 months now, in rites of passage and initiation over a 12-month period. So I'm going to be offering a plant and earth pathway apprenticeship that I call, and this is my own word and I love it, it's earth doership. So it's an earth doership, and that's going to be around connecting into the earth wisdoms and creating a panacea of plants that you initiate with in their totality over a period of time. So it's not a herbal medicine course, it's more a way of working with plants from an animist perspective. And then the other pathway is the shamanic and ceremonial crafting pathway. And so over 12 months, it's really digging into this, your shamanic blueprint. And that I'm not talking about South American, North American. It could be it could be your own thing. It could be Celtic. It could be nothing. It could be just something that you understand within yourself. That's wanting to live the good red road, wanting to live that middle path in a ceremonial way. So that's more about people who are wanting to activate the shamanic aspect in them to place into a ceremonial setting. So so that's where I'm sort of heading now. So they're called Earth Wisdom Apprenticeships. They're a move on from the residency work. So there's a lot of similarities, and a lot of the work is similar, but deeper and a lot longer initiation processes. And that all came from me sitting back in the space of, we need to bring back, I keep saying it, but bring back the old ways, but more in a space of deep reverence for what it is that you're doing, not just about a fly-by-night course. Maybe that plants the seed, but if that's the case, then here's an opportunity for someone to come and deepen their understanding. So for a herbalist who studies Western medical herbalism, if they came and did work with me, the difference is I'm not going to teach you about the constituents of a plant. I'm going to teach you or help you remember how to connect with the botanical consciousness and the imprint, and how you see yourself in that plant and how that plant sees themselves in you, and that relationship. So it's a very different understanding of more in folk herbalism than anything else. And
yeah, it sounds like it would be quite an experience from a practical sense, rather than just from the mind, the sense of actually walking for 12 months. And I'm curious, would people stay with you for this period, or?
Imagine that. My partner would be like, what? No, a lot of it will be online. So there will be online components, and then there will be 3 or 4 days sort of retreats where they'll come to get some activations from being here on the land. But part of the reason why I want people to do it in their own spaces is so people start to learn about the bioregional aspects and their own biome. So
it's not like they're going to you and learning something, then coming back into their life. It's almost like it's happening at the same time.
That's it. And then they can come for a couple of days for a certain thing. I don't even exactly know yet. All the information for this will be closer to the end of the year is when I'll release it all. Yeah. So it's exciting. It's a big undertaking, but it's where it needs to be. And, I would have loved to have had that myself. So, for that longer period of time. And I mean, I've done it myself, but I would love to have seen it offered in this way. So that's
very exciting. I'm very excited for you, and I'm sending some kind of blessings of love and light in the direction of this project. I feel, this is almost like, there's like a, it's more deeply grounded and rooted in what you're wanting, and it makes sense from what you shared.
It's about, my new business name is Kin of the Fian Danu, and it's in Irish. It basically, in a roundabout way, means the kindred of the wild great mother. So it's really about a desire to cultivate wild relationships back to the natural world. That would be my catchphrase if someone asked me. What it is, just cultivating that connection back to the land. And how do we go about that? Let's see.
Step by step.
Dream it back. Dream it back.
How magical of a thing. You just kind of going on this journey, and this idea that's been percolating, and for this to come into reality and for you to be able to kind of birth this offering.
Well, thank you for that too, though, because this is the first I've spoken about it with you.
It's very exciting. I feel like getting that medicine drum out right now and just kind of
I know.
This is awesome.
Right there, it's hanging on the wall.
Very, very nice. So thank you so much for kind of sharing all this. And I guess it would be good, because if people are kind of watching or listening, and there's probably some people that might be interested, would you be able to share a bit about how they can get in touch with you, just that standard kind of piece around your details. I'll obviously put links in and things like that as well.
Yes. So at the moment, by the time this podcast gets released, I'm sure that I'll actually have my my new website is like half done. So
Nice.
Yeah, so early September, I'll have it live, brand new website, and it's kinofthefiandanu.com, but it'll be in your links so people can see how it's
Definitely.
It's all in Irish. And Instagram social handles are the same, will be the same, Kin of the Fiandanu.
Yeah.
And through my website, you can email and contact me if mobile. Everything is on there as well. And all the information about all the offerings to do with the Earth Wisdom apprenticeships. And I also have an apothecary that will be up there called Wild Kin, as well as I'll be doing counsel with Botanical Consciousness on one-on-one with people, where we just sit in conversation with the plants and see what comes through for a person, what plants through, what medicine comes through for them from the plant realms, and if they need to integrate or work with that green body of the plant, then I can point them in the right direction, or they can get medicine from me. So there's also the ceremonial work, and it'll all be on the website.
Seems like there's a lot packed
There's
in,
a
a
lot
lot of experience and kind of teachings packed in.
But luckily, I have a lot of my students helping me otherwise in different ways. So
yeah, that's a beautiful thing as well, to be able to.
Oh yeah, that's part of initiation work, is assisting and that. So
thank you for tuning in to part 2 of this 2-part series with Renee McCready. I hope that you've been able to deeply connect with the wisdom shared through Renee's teachings and stories and sharings. It really means a lot that you're here with us, and hopefully that can pass through your being and be nourished and transformed into a deeper offering that you may contribute to the blossoming of the emergent world story. If you'd like to go deeper with either working with me one-on-one or with Renee, head over to todaydreamer.com and send me a message, an email, or click on the links that I've provided to get into Renee's work. I really appreciate your presence and your engagement, and I will catch you in the next episode.